Hello and welcome to the EMJ GOLD podcast, brought to you by EMJ, your number one open access destination for HCPs and pharma globally. Now, it's a lovely afternoon here in London, which we're very, very excited about.
Definitely, yes. I think everyone's jumped onto the hot weather as well. I've been invited to about 3 barbecues, I think, this weekend. Crazy.
Yes, it's all go here. Very excited seeing a bit of sunshine finally, but we're also really excited because we've got a really interesting episode to share today. Today we're going to be sharing a conversation I had with Danie du Plessis, who is the Executive Vice President of Pharmaceutical Operations at Kyowa Kirin.
That's right. I'm very excited to listen in on this episode. I know you had a great time talking to Danie.
Yeah.
Now, Danie only took on this role in April this year, and he already has a really broad background in both the pharmaceutical space and the healthcare space as well. He actually ran his own private practice for a while before joining the pharmaceutical industry back in, I think it was 1993.
Long time ago.
Yes. Since then, he's worked in medical affairs, marketing and sales, pharmacovigilance, and clinical operations. So a very, very broad background across the industry there. And this includes previously holding the role of EVP for medical affairs at Kyowa Kirin.
Yes, he is big into medical affairs. He is the director and chair of the global non-profit, the Medical Affairs Professional Society Board, otherwise known as MAPS. And he's also a fellow of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine as well. So he has a broad range of experience, I think we can say, across the industry. For the episode today, he joined me to talk about a really interesting subject, which is the power of patient partnerships. We hear about patient centricity, patient advocacy. You know, it's a huge topic in pharma. So I wanted to find out how it's evolved from him, how to get it right. Kyowa Kirin have actually won awards for their patient partnerships.
Oh, wow.
And what might need to change in the future? Will they need to expand? We are obviously living in a very changeable world.
Absolutely.
Which is something we cover in the interview.
Sounds like a hugely interesting topic. Shall we tune in?
Let's do it.
So Danie, welcome to the EMJ GOLD podcast. It's lovely to have you in the studio. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So for the benefit of our listeners today, we're going to be talking about a topic that I know you're really passionate about, and a topic that has been gaining more and more momentum, really, and it is patient partnerships. So when I was preparing for this interview, I saw a bit of research that 88% of patient groups are now doing work with pharmaceutical companies. This was at 61% in 2017. So the amount of groups that are involved with pharma is definitely growing, and I think the industry is clearly seeing it as more important, and patient groups are as well. So that's a really positive starting point for the conversation. But before we get into patient partnerships, I'd love to know, why did you join pharma in the first place?
That's such a common question. And it's a relatively...
We can't understand why, can we?
It's a relatively common response, right? Completely by chance and unplanned. So I finished medical school in South Africa. I did a master's in pharmacology, clinical pharmacology. And then spent some time doing primary care work, part of that in the military and part in a private practice. I got to a point where I wanted to do something more than primary care practice. So there were a few options, and one of them was industry, actually a suggestion by my dad. And I was sort of, why industry? And he said, well, you've always liked business. This sounds like a combination, and I'm okay. So I applied 3 companies at the time, and so went for interviews and got a job offer at the time from Eli Lilly and Company in Johannesburg. This was more than 30 years ago now. And at the time I thought, well, I'll give it a go for 3 years. And so if I really didn't like it, I could always, go and do something else. I suppose after 10 years, I thought, probably going to stay. And as I say, I've passed the 30-year mark. So it worked for me.
No looking back.
I've had lots of fun and lots of opportunities, I have to say, which is probably one of the reasons why I stayed in industry, right? So many opportunities doing different things that I didn't even know existed when I was at medical school. So I was fortunate to spend time in pharmacovigilance and clinical operations, data management, came to the UK, worked in Australia, So it was just a fascinating time up to now, and still, I think for medics, also for pharmacists, anybody in sort of life sciences, once you graduate, it's just the beginning. You can really do whatever, including pharma. And then within pharma, there's so many different roles.
I've heard people say that a lot, especially the journey from physician to industry and how the scope became so much wider, not only just for impact on patients, but also to do such a diverse range of roles. Yeah. When did you first get involved with patient partnerships?
So probably from the very beginning, to be honest, even although we didn't call it that.
Okay, what was it called?
So when I joined industry, as I've said, I've worked for Lilly. One of the therapeutic areas we worked in at that time was in depression, right? Major depressive disorder. And there was an advisory group, patient organization, support group, I think they called themselves in those days, for depression and anxiety in South Africa. And there was just a really good relationship helping to educate, and at the time to also help people understand the difference between feeling down and actually having major depressive disorder.
Interesting.
And of course, the support group was absolutely instrumental with that. So I started working very closely with them from the very beginning, to be honest, right? But it was just a collaboration. Later on, it got a name around, patient involvement, patient partnership, patient-centered, patient-focused. There's so many different terms which probably all mean something similar, to be honest. I think the fact that I was also in primary care for some time helped me to always have a more holistic view of patients rather than just diabetes or lung cancer or infection, but rather focus on an individual from a more holistic perspective. So it's, I think, always been part of me, to be honest.
And how have you seen the approach evolve? You say it's got so many different names now, but has it become, obviously it's become more structured, but has it become more effective? Are you seeing more of an impact now within these relationships that perhaps there wasn't at the start?
I think it's very much work in progress, and there's more and more meetings, discussions, papers on the topic, which is a good thing, which is a really good thing. It is much more structured. There's a number of non-industry groups like Patient-Focused Medicines Development in Europe, for example, who really focus on the value and the importance of interacting with patient and patient groups. And they also, there's other groups like UParty who's helping to educate people who's maybe not in life sciences on research methodology, for example. So there's a lot of really good work that is happening now. There was a time when industry, I think, understood the value of advocacy and patient advocacy, as it was called at that time, which very often sat in corporate affairs, but not necessarily. But sadly, some of those things was also created by industry, maybe with sometimes ulterior motives. I'm talking 80s, 90s now, right? So it's a long time ago. So we've moved on from that to really have the independence that's needed with these patient organizations, but a better collaboration now, and working together, co-creating things, understanding the need from a patient perspective. And also important to maybe just mention, it's very common to talk about patients and patient organizations and patient support, but let's not forget the importance of families and carers as well, right? Especially when we look at chronic diseases, that's as important as understanding the lived experience from the individual themselves.
Well, we've touched on there a little bit of the future, and the world is at an inflection point where there is a lot of change going on everywhere you look. How do you think the role of these patient partnerships is going to become more important in the future alongside some of the trends we're seeing? Climate change, I know, is something we've spoken about.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that patients, because of the internet, amongst other things, and people living with chronic diseases are much more informed today than maybe 5 or 10 years ago. The lived experience is so important from my perspective for the industry to focus on, right? So we are not treating diseases. We are treating people. And what we need to understand is the unmet need from their perspective, right? We can remain very scientific. We can say, well, we need to translate the scientific data into clinical application. All of that is true. But there is this notion of, does it make a difference, right? So benefit risk, efficiency, efficacy. There's a number of different terms that are being used. So the way to do that is to interact, to understand, to ask, to bring them in, to allow them their perspective to come and tell us, why are you designing the clinical trial in that way? Because the implication for us, if we want to participate, is that we have to go 100 miles or 100 kilometers every 2 weeks just for somebody to take blood. Isn't there a different way that we can do it? Can't we actually have it done locally? And that might actually speak also to another topic which I'm becoming more passionate about, and that is really just, call it ESG if you want, right? The environment, sustainability, governance, but it's not particularly green to travel so far for just somebody to take some blood if you can do it locally. How do we do that? How do we actually understand from a pharmaceutical industry perspective those related things that impact people's well-being? What role can we play? And of course, there's the carbon footprint and all of those things that is sort of more obvious. But what else can we do to make a difference to the general well-being of people as it relates to climate change, for example?
And how can companies get ahead of the curve and actually foresee these trends up ahead and prepare for them now rather than being caught out by them later?
Yeah. Majority of companies, especially the bigger ones, already have some dedicated thinking and strategies around these topics. It's maybe implemented at different levels. It is very much a journey. There's a starting point of, as I say, carbon footprint in manufacturing.
Yeah.
Also about recycling. I'm thinking, asthma inhalers, for example, to recycle those, but to also the so-called propellants in it, right? To make sure that is, also, I suppose, planet friendly is a term that I've heard recently. So the majority of companies are starting to look at this already, and also in indirect ways. For example, electric vehicles, or making sure that the offices are green, or if there are meetings, how do we do it in a carbon neutral fashion? So it is very much work in progress. I think it would be fair to say in almost all companies already. The implementation is at different levels, but it's getting there.
And I think the industry's reputation is a really interesting thing with patients. And I think the more that companies can show that they are taking steps like this, that will only improve. And I think perception of wanting to get involved with industry will hopefully rise as well. Why do you think sometimes patients don't get involved with pharma companies? Is it the lack of awareness, or is it reluctance to get involved and associate?
Yeah, it might be both and many more, right? So that's a very interesting conversation to have as well as it relates to health equity and diversity of data or clinical trial diversity. So one of the reasons that there's still a gap and a challenge is still some distrust in the pharmaceutical industry. So some of that is cultural, and it's different in different ethnic groups. So the industry has a role to play, again, in collaboration with patient organizations, but also community groups to educate, to help educate about research in general, in order to almost get patient advocates for the industry, and to bring people closer to understand that, we're not the big bad wolf, right? Yes, we may have in the past done a few things that wasn't fantastic, but we have moved on. I think there's a very good ethical governance that people strive to get to. So we do have a role to play in the industry regarding that education, so that we can have diverse data. At the moment still, I believe the majority of data available on the internet, for example, are Caucasian male data, right?
Yeah.
And that may not be 100% applicable to women or to people of color, right? Or in Asia, where we know there's some differences in pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, for example. So we do need to get more diverse data, and the industry should play a role, specifically medical affairs, for later on in the life cycle of the products.
You mentioned medical affairs there. I have to say it's one of my favourite functions in pharma. It's one I've enjoyed learning about, and one that has a moment in the sun now, but has been sort of growing over a number of years. What's exciting you most about the medical affairs space at the moment? I know you've sort of slightly moved in recent times, but yeah.
Yeah, but majority of my time in industry is medical affairs, and at the moment I'm still chairman of the board of the Medical Affairs Professional Society as well. So it's very close to my heart, because even although the whole industry need to be patient focused and patient centered, I truly believe that the main voice of the patient internally is medical affairs. And there's an opportunity that it's also an external voice. I think there's a great opportunity for medical affairs to play the role of connector in future within a healthcare system or ecosystem. Now, that might include patients, patient groups, carers, families, healthcare providers, payers, regulators, industry.
Stakeholders.
All the stakeholders. And I think, if anything, it's getting more. But people need to learn how to do things together to the benefit of the end user, which is somebody who lives with a disease. And that's why they have to be part of that discussion. But I think the future for medical affairs specifically is very much focusing on how we can get better as an industry around helping health equity, helping diversity of data, helping climate change, helping global access, right? Which is a whole different conversation on what is available in developing countries versus others.
Yeah.
That in itself is probably, a conference on its own for a few weeks, probably. But those are the things that I think, we can get better at, and that we should focus on. There's a lot of people who focus on the science and what it means, but there's something else that we need to look at for a bigger, more holistic approach.
Yeah, it's got so much potential as such a strategic function.
Exactly.
I always find it interesting when I speak to those who are, in the really early medical affairs departments, and said that their role was largely signing off different things to say this is okay. And now you look at it now, and you're just hearing you speak about it there, you can see how much it's grown, which is, I think only can be a good thing for the industry. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was mentorship. I know this is something you're very passionate about. You mentioned you're chairman of MAPS. How has this played a role in your career so far? Why are you interested in it now? And what do you do? How are you mentoring people at the moment?
Yeah, I am passionate about both mentoring and coaching. I was extremely fortunate in the early days of my career to have a line manager who was very much focused on transferable skills. And I had the opportunity to do roles which I had never thought of, as and when they came up. And I remember all those conversations in the early days, and why would I do it? And it was very clear, actually, from their perspective, that here's what you will learn there, and here's how it will help you further, right? So whether it was something more operational. So it was always about that bigger picture of transferable skills rather than the job itself, and a view of what's the next role. It wasn't that explicit to me at that point, by the way. But, on reflection, I think that's where it started, probably, 20 years ago, maybe even more. So that sort of stuck with me. So for me, to help people is sort of what energizes me. And there's different ways of doing that, right? So it's probably why I'm passionate about patients as well, because it's helping them, but also about teams and people within the industry and within their careers. So it's a joy for me to have conversations with people at the beginning of their career, or, as has happened more and more in the UK, people who are exploring moving out of the NHS into industry, which is very interesting. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older that more people come to me, or whether it really is a change from the NHS, right? So, and again, that's a whole separate conversation.
We won't go there today.
No, because that's another very long conversation. So within MAPS, we have a mentoring program as well, where people can sign up to be a mentor and to share their experiences. And then people at the beginning of their career sign up to be a mentee, and there's a process that we follow to try to connect people, to match people as much as we can. So that's happening, and of course I'm involved with that as well, not as actively as I want to be. Wasn't right in the beginning. And then, I also coach people more generally as part of that. But recently I had conversations with a number of people in one of the big pharma companies. The conversation started around coaching, but there's such a hunger to learn from people who has the experience, i.e. mentoring, right? Sometimes you just want to say, well, how do you do this, right? And this is not about a standard operating procedure that you can go and read, and, if you're lucky, you can understand it, or if not, then
Yeah,
that makes sense. And it's
sense.
not because you can't understand stuff, it's just how it's written sometimes in all companies. But sometimes you just want to know, how do I lead change? How do I manage a difficult situation? Or how do I have a really difficult conversation? I know what the theory says, but how do I do it? So there's a huge need, even for people who's been in the industry for a number of years already, to speak to people who have experience. At the same time, people like me, dinosaurs,
30 years.
has a need to be mentored by the younger generation, right? When I joined, it was quite common, and I work for a Japanese company now, where it's very common that you have one employer in your life, right? That, as you know, is absolutely not true anymore. So that's not even a cultural thing. Maybe it is. In Japan, it's still expected that you stay where you start, type of thing. You do get opportunities, that is true. But the reverse mentoring, which is not a term I particularly like, because mentoring is really about learning from somebody who's got more experience than yourself. So, whether it's a younger person or older person is sort of irrelevant. So I don't really like reverse. But in any case, that has been coined, I suppose. But, we can learn what is important for younger generation. We can learn from, diversity, inclusion, it's things that are different topics now than what it was 30 years ago. So mentoring, I think, is incredibly important from a development perspective, personal development perspective.
Well, I love that you brought that up, reverse mentoring. It's something that we've written about before and we think it's really interesting. So I suppose to finish, is there anything that you've learnt through the process of reverse mentoring that's particularly sat with you and you carry with you through your work today?
Yes. One of the key things, there's two things that stand out. One, I worked at GSK for a number of years, and there was a good program as well. And I remember a young female colleague who explained the importance of, getting married and starting with a family, and the concerns about what is going to happen with career and how to manage the two, right? A very, very open conversation, and just bringing things in which was sort of not things that I'd thought of before. So that was a really an aha moment for me. And then more lately, this whole notion of alignment between company purpose and personal individual purpose. Can I work for a company, for any company, or can I only work for a company who understands what is important to me, who's willing to give me a flexible working pattern, who understands, everything that has an impact on my life. There's actually a third one as well that I find extremely interesting, which is around learning from people who are actually taking care of a relatively young family and become carers for elderly parents for whatever reason, because of the whole sort of longevity that we're seeing. There's a group of people actually in the workforce that needs to do both, which is also interesting. So just learning from them, learning from their experience, understanding the importance of flexibility for them to take care of, a mother with dementia and a father with cardiovascular disease who still live in their own house, but they need flexibility in working to be able to do that. And those things for me all fall under mentoring, because you learn something from somebody who's experienced, either for oneself or just for awareness.
Well, I think a theme throughout this has definitely been compassion, whether it's for patients or teams or anything in between. So, Danie, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for chatting with me today, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for the invitation, and take care.
Thank you.
What a great episode. In terms of insights, starting off with the main topic of the podcast, I found it really interesting when Danie was speaking to how the industry might need to work a bit more with patients in the future to provide not only more convenient but also greener alternatives to clinical trials. I think it's definitely a hot topic at the moment. As I'm sure you're all aware, the climate crisis is a hugely concerning issue, and any improvements that we can make is a step in the right direction, obviously. So, yeah, great to see that the industry is thinking big when it does come to global trends like these.
It'll be interesting to see who comes up tops on being most effective on this issue. I think for me, I really enjoyed what he was talking about at the end there, actually, about reverse mentoring. We think it could maybe have a more apt name. But no, I thought it was really interesting that he champions this process and that he thinks he's learned a lot through it. I know some companies are quite familiar with this concept, but it's not the case everywhere. From learning about career and motherhood, I think this is something not all men are aware of, the challenges, but also the importance of purpose. So he was talking to the fact that many employees now care a lot more about whether their values align with the company. And that's definitely something we've noticed over the past couple of years. So, yeah, it was interesting to hear his thoughts on that as well.
Definitely. Wow. Well, that does bring us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much again to Danie for coming in to speak with us, and thank you for listening. Do be sure to tune in next week when we speak to yet another key figure from the pharmaceutical industry. But until then, it's bye from us.
Bye.